This is one of the most visited, most photographed places in America. And it has swallowed people whole. 10 people. 10 different corners of this state. And in every single case, something went wrong that we still can't explain. Pull up a map, lock your doors, and let's get into it. If you're new here, subscribe. New cases every week. November 1934, Southern Utah. A young man named Everett Ruiz walks out of the small desert town of Escalante carrying a bedroll, a journal, a set of watercolors, and enough supplies for a few weeks in the canyon country. He has 2 donkeys, Chocolatero and Cockleburs, and he knows this landscape the way most 20-year-olds know their own neighborhood. He has been wandering the American Southwest since he was 16 years old. He has camped alone under stars that most people never see. He has learned to speak Navajo. He has exchanged letters with Ansel Adams. Dorothea Lange, one of the most celebrated documentary photographers in American history, sat him down and photographed him. He is, by any reasonable measure, someone who understands exactly what the desert can do to a person, and has decided to keep going anyway. That's the first thing you need to understand about this case. Everett Ruiz was not a weekend hiker who underestimated the heat. He was not a tourist who wandered off a marked trail without water. He was experienced, well supplied, and he had done this dozens of times before. He knew the canyon country of southern Utah with an intimacy that bordered on obsession. He had named his donkeys. He had spent years building a life on the road between one wilderness and the next. He walked into that canyon country like a man walking into his own living room. And then the desert closed behind him, and he was gone. He had told his parents before he left that they probably wouldn't hear from him for a while. He was heading toward the Escalante River drainage, into the slot canyons and sandstone labyrinths that sprawl southeast of town. And there were no post offices out there, no telegraph lines, no roads, just rock and sky and distance. He said he'd be back before Christmas. His last letter to his brother Waldo was dated November 11th, 1934, written from the Escalante Rim. In it, he wrote something that would be quoted endlessly in the years to come. I have not tired of the wilderness. Rather, I enjoy its beauty and the vagrant life I lead, more keenly all the time. I prefer the saddle to the streetcar and star-sprinkled sky to a roof, the obscure and difficult trail leading into the unknown to any paved highway. It is enough that I am surrounded by beauty. He mailed it from the Escalante post office. Then he walked out of town, headed southeast toward Davis Gulch with his 2 donkeys. And that was the last anyone heard from him. The last confirmed time anyone saw Everett Ruiz alive was November 20th, 1934. He was on the Hole in the Rock trail when 2 sheep herders named Clayton Porter and Adlin Lay came across him. They shared a campfire together out there in the open desert. They offered him food. He declined, said he had plenty of his own. The 3 of them sat for a while in the way that strangers do when there's nothing but open country around them. And then Everett stood up, gathered his donkeys, and walked away down the trail toward Davis Gulch. It was late afternoon. The desert light was dropping toward the canyon walls. There was nothing remarkable about the moment, nothing alarming. Just a young man heading deeper into the landscape he loved. The donkeys trailing behind him, the red rock swallowing the sound of his footsteps. He was never seen again. At first, no one was alarmed. His parents knew he went dark for long stretches. Letters piled up at the Escalante post office, uncollected. But that had happened before. He had warned them he'd be unreachable. December passed, then January of 1935, then February, and that's when the silence began to feel different. He had said he'd be home for Christmas. Christmas had come and gone without a word. His parents started writing letters to sheriffs, to radio stations, to newspapers, to Indian agents, to postmasters in every remote town in southern Utah that Everett had been known to pass through. No one had seen him. No one could account for him. The letters came back with nothing. In late February 1935, a local man named Gale Bailey spotted 2 donkeys in Davis Gulch, deep in the canyon 45 miles southeast of Escalante. The animals looked healthy. They were standing in a small enclosure of stacked brush and branches, a rough corral that someone had clearly built for them. They were corralled. They were not wandering. They had not spooked and run. They were standing there in the pen that Everett had built, calm and cared for, as though he had stepped away for an hour and would be back by nightfall. Here's the critical detail about that corral. You do not corral your animals if you're planning to vanish. You corral them if you're going somewhere on foot, a short climb, a scramble up a canyon wall, a temporary camp deeper in the rock, and you fully intend to return. The donkeys being corralled is not the sign of a man who fell from a cliff. It is not the sign of a man who was swept away by a flash flood. It is the sign of a man who put his animals safely away, walked somewhere, and simply never came back. A formal search party formed in March 1935, organized by a local commissioner named Jennings Allen. They entered Davis Gulch and found the campsite. Remnants of supplies, evidence that Everett had been living there and working from that spot. But his diary, the meticulous, beautifully written journal he had kept since he was 12 years old, was gone. His money was gone. His watercolors were gone. His cooking kit, his paintings, the portable record of his interior life, all of it gone with him. Whatever had happened to Everett Roos, he had been moving when it occurred. He was carrying everything that mattered to him. And then the search party found something else. Carved into the sandstone wall above a Moki trail, the ancient hand and toe holds chiseled into the cliff face centuries ago by the people who had lived in these canyons long before anyone else, was an inscription. 4 letters, a year, Nemo, 1934. Nemo, the Latin word for nobody. Also the name of the legendary captain from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. A man who disappeared into the ocean he loved and was never seen again. Everett had used this alias before, in letters and journal entries, when he wanted to feel anonymous, untethered, free. He identified with the character. The sea Nemo loved was Everett's desert. But out here, carved alone into the stone above a trail that almost no one would ever find, in the last canyon he had entered before disappearing from the earth, the word took on a different and heavier meaning. And there is one more layer to it that tends to stop people cold when they hear it. Nemo is an anagram for omen. Whether Everett intended that or not, nobody knows. But he was never found, and the word is still there. The formal search expanded through the spring of 1935. An aerial survey was conducted at 12,000 feet, covering the ground from Lee's Ferry all the way to Escalante. Secondary ground searches went out in May and June. Nothing. No body. No gear found outside the campsite. No sign of an accident, no blood, no indication of violence, no physical evidence that anything had happened to Everett Roos at all. He had simply ceased to exist somewhere in Davis Gulch, and the canyon kept its answer. Then, in 1963, the Bureau of Reclamation completed the Glen Canyon Dam. The waters of Lake Powell began to rise. Davis Gulch filled slowly, week by week, month by month. The waterline climbing the sandstone walls, the campsite disappearing beneath the surface, the Moki Trail going under. The primary search zone, the last place on Earth anyone had any reason to look for Everett Roos, was buried under a reservoir. Whatever evidence might still have existed down there was sealed away permanently beneath millions of gallons of water. Now this is where the case turns dark in a different way. In 2009, 75 years after Everett's disappearance, a new lead emerged. An elderly Navajo man provided an account, passed down through his family, that Everett had been murdered near Combe Ridge, far to the east, by two men who wanted his donkeys. A gravesite was identified. Bones were excavated. Researchers from the University of Colorado analyzed the skeletal remains and found what they described as a compelling match. The right age, the right height, the right facial structure. Genetic markers that seemed to align with Roos family DNA. National Geographic Adventure magazine ran the story. The mystery, they announced, was solved. 2 months later, it unraveled. A Bureau of Land Management staffer in Monticello, Utah, tracked down Everett's dental records from the 1930s, records showing he had gold fillings. The skull from Combe Ridge had no gold fillings. Deeper DNA analysis followed, conducted by the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. The results were unambiguous. The remains were not Everett Ruiz. They belonged to a different missing person entirely, a Navajo man named Joe Santisteban, who had his own family waiting for answers. Santisteban's remains were returned to the Navajo Nation. National Geographic Adventure ceased publication shortly afterward. Ruiz remained missing. There is one final detail from 2016 that has never been fully resolved. A writer named Scott Thiboni, investigating the case independently, located what he believed was Everett's actual final campsite, a hidden alcove in the sandstone, remote and beautiful, with an unweathered Nemo inscription nearby. A tourist had previously found bones in a crack in the rock close to that site and given them to a National Park Service ranger. The ranger deposited them with his supervisor at the Lake Powell Marina. And then those bones disappeared from the chain of custody. They were never cataloged. They were never tested. They simply vanished, the same way Everett had. The inscription at Davis Gulch has been submerged and resurfaced multiple times as Lake Powell's water level has risen and fallen with the years of western drought. When the water drops low enough, it comes back. Nemo 1934, still carved into the stone, still legible after 90 years. Everett Ruiz put it there and walked away. He has never come back. Ruiz disappeared into a wilderness that consumed him slowly, across 9 decades of silence. The next case happened on a suburban sidewalk in a neighborhood full of people, and somehow that makes it worse. October 1st, 1974, Holiday, Utah. A quiet suburb pressed against the southeastern edge of Salt Lake City, where the Wasatch foothills begin to rise and the streets are wide and tree-lined and familiar. The kind of neighborhood where people recognize each other's cars in the driveway, where teenagers walk to school without thinking about it, where the worst thing that usually happens on a Tuesday night is a parking dispute or a noise complaint. The kind of place where a 16-year-old girl can walk out her front door at 9 o'clock at night without her parents feeling any particular alarm. Nancy Wilcox was 16 years old. She was a junior at Olympus High School, which sat one block from her family's home on Arnett Drive. She was an active member of her local LDS congregation. She had worked briefly at the Arctic Circle Drive-In restaurant on 33rd South and 20th East, where she was known as friendly and easy to talk to. Her family described her as bubbly, mature for her age, someone who made the people around her feel comfortable. She had 4 brothers and a sister. She had a boyfriend her father didn't entirely approve of, which was not unusual and was not yet a cause for concern. That detail about the boyfriend, the fact that her father disapproved, is what set the night of October 1st in motion. Sometime that evening, Nancy's boyfriend came by the house to visit her. Her father turned him away at the door before Nancy could see him. Nancy was hurt. She was frustrated. She was a 16-year-old girl who had just been denied something she wanted by a parent, and she did what 16-year-olds do. She argued. And then she left. At approximately 9 o'clock that night, she walked out of the house on Arnett Drive. Maybe she was going to find her boyfriend. Maybe she just needed to walk off the anger in the cool October air. Her parents assumed she'd calm down and come home within the hour. They'd had arguments before. Everyone had. She would be back. She was never back. Here's the critical detail. And it took 50 full years for the public record to get this right. Nancy Wilcox did not disappear on October 2nd, 1974. That date has appeared in virtually every article, database entry, book, and documentary about her case for 5 decades. It is wrong. Nancy disappeared on the evening of October 1st. Her parents reported her missing the following morning, October 2nd, after spending the night searching the neighborhood themselves and finding nothing. The date of the police report became the date attached to her name in every official record that followed, a clerical error that was never caught, never corrected, and eventually hardened into accepted history. In 2024, a KSL investigative team obtained the original Salt Lake County Sheriff's case file and documented the discrepancy for the first time. By the time the truth was published, Nancy had been missing for 50 years. But the date is almost secondary to what happened after her parents went to the police. When they reported Nancy missing, the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Juvenile Division looked at the circumstances. Teenage girl, argument with father, a boyfriend in the picture, and classified her as a runaway. They did not open an investigation. They did not put out a public appeal for information. They did not send officers to canvass the neighborhood or interview neighbors or check the surrounding area. They told the family that Nancy would almost certainly show up on her own, that this was what teenage runaways did, and that the best thing her parents could do was wait. Nancy's mother, Connie Wilcox, did not accept this. She pleaded with the department to investigate. She made calls, wrote letters, pushed back against the classification. She was dismissed repeatedly by a juvenile division that had made up its mind. The police did not publicly appeal for information about Nancy Wilcox until December of 1974, 3 full months after she walked out of that house. 3 months during which any physical evidence in the area had been washed away by rain, walked over by neighbors, and forgotten. 3 months during which the case went cold before it was ever treated as a case at all. By December, 2 more young women in Utah had been murdered. A third had survived a kidnapping attempt at a shopping mall in Murray. The Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office was finally beginning to understand that something serious was happening in their state, a pattern that would eventually be traced back to a single man who had moved to Salt Lake City from Seattle in September of 1974. 1 month before Nancy Wilcox disappeared. His name was Ted Bundy, and he was 27 years old, and he had enrolled at the University of Utah School of Law. He had moved into an apartment at 565 First Avenue in Salt Lake City. He drove a 1968 Volkswagen Beetle. He was handsome, well-spoken, and entirely unknown to Utah law enforcement, because at that point, no one in Utah had any reason to know who he was. The murders he had committed in Washington state had not yet been definitively linked to a single suspect. Nobody was looking for him. Nobody was watching him. He had driven east across the desert and arrived in a new state full of young women who didn't know his name. Within a month of moving to Salt Lake City, Ted Bundy had found Nancy Wilcox. We know this because of what happened 15 years later, in January of 1989, in a Florida prison cell. Bundy was days away from his execution. He had been convicted in Colorado and Florida. He had years of accumulated charges, confessions, and denials behind him. In those final days, he began meeting with law enforcement from multiple states, offering confessions in a transparent attempt to delay his execution date. One of those meetings was with Salt Lake County Detective Dennis Couch. During that interview, Bundy admitted to the murder of Nancy Wilcox. His account was specific in some places and vague in others. He described the area near Olympus High School, the orchard that used to sit at 3900 South, adjacent to the school grounds, approximately 500 feet from the Wilcox family's front door. He said he had taken her to his apartment. He said he had held her there for 1 full day. He did not go into detail about the murder. Later, when pushed to identify where he had left her body, he pointed to a map of Utah and indicated an area near Capitol Reef National Park, roughly 4 hours south of Salt Lake City. He said he had buried her somewhere in that region. He said he could not remember the precise location. Police took the Capitol Reef lead seriously. After Bundy's execution on January 24th, 1989, they searched the area. They found nothing. Nancy Wilcox has never been found. Her case is still technically classified as open. Now this is where it gets more complicated. Bundy's biographer, Ann Rule, who had known him personally, worked with him at a Seattle crisis hotline before she knew what he was, and written the definitive account of his crimes, believed that his final confessions were at least partially designed to mislead. She described his strategy as sending investigators out to waste their time in locations he had fabricated, something Bundy, with his obsessive need for control, would have found genuinely satisfying from a prison cell. Whether his Capitol Reef claim was truthful, partially truthful, or an invented misdirection has never been determined. There is one more piece of the Nancy Wilcox story that tends to surface in accounts from people who knew her. In the months before she disappeared, Nancy had mentioned to family members that there was an older man who came into the Arctic Circle drive-in where she worked. He paid unusual attention to her. She told her cousin that he was in law school. At some point, and this is the part that sits with you, he drove past the Wilcox family home while Nancy happened to be outside. And she saw him and became visibly excited, pointed him out, said something like, "That's the guy who's been coming into my work." The family has always believed that Ted Bundy may have been watching Nancy Wilcox for weeks before the night she stormed out of her house and walked into whatever was waiting for her on Arnett Drive. The orchard behind Olympus High School no longer exists. It was developed decades ago, paved over, built on, turned into the kind of ordinary suburban infrastructure that no one looks twice at. Whatever happened there on the night of October 1st, 1974, has been erased by the simple passage of time and construction. The ground itself has been replaced. Nancy's mother, Connie Wilcox, spent the rest of her life without an answer. The family held a memorial service for Nancy in 1990, 16 years after she walked out the door. When they had finally, quietly, stopped waiting for her to come back, her name still sits in the cold case database with the wrong date and the wrong details, a 50-year-old error that no one ever corrected. With Nancy, we at least have a name for who took her, even if we will never know exactly where she is. The next case is darker in a particular way, because officially, after 15 years of investigation and hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, we still do not have that name. Not a single confirmed suspect. Not one arrest. Just a mother in West Valley City, a night in December, and a husband who took the answer with him when he died. Hit subscribe if you want to go deeper on cases like this. December 6th, 2009. West Valley City, Utah. A Sunday. A suburb 10 miles west of Salt Lake City. The kind of place built around the rhythms of ordinary family life. Church in the morning, dinner in the afternoon, kids in daycare on weekdays, neighbors who wave from driveways. The streets are flat and wide. The houses are modest and close together. There is nothing about the geography of West Valley City that suggests danger. Nothing about it that suggests secrets. It is, by every visible measure, exactly what it appears to be. Susan Powell was 28 years old. She was a mother of two, Charlie, who was 4, and Braden, who was 2. She worked at Wells Fargo Investments. She went to church. She took her boys to daycare. She maintained what everyone who knew her described as a stable, put-together, outward life. Organized, warm, present. But privately, in the months and years before December 2009, Susan had been documenting something that the people around her didn't fully know about. She kept a journal. She wrote emails to close friends about the state of her marriage. In 2008, she had made a secret video of herself walking through their property, narrating her concerns in a quiet, measured voice. And in that video, she said, on camera, recorded deliberately so that someone would find it if something happened to her. I want it documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage. And then she said something else. If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. She recorded that video more than a year before she disappeared. She hid it from her husband. She also wrote a private will that she kept concealed from him, naming her wishes for her children in the event of her death. She told co-workers at Wells Fargo that if anything ever happened to her, they should give police access to the documents she had hidden. She did not tell the people around her that she was in danger, not directly, not in those words. But she was building a record. She was leaving a trail. She was, in some quiet and methodical way, preparing for a possibility she could not say out loud. Her husband's name was Joshua Powell. They had been married since 2001. They had met in Washington State, where both of them had grown up, and eventually settled in West Valley City for Josh's work. The marriage had been deteriorating for years. Josh had filed for bankruptcy in 2007, declaring more than $200,000 in debt. He had a controlling streak that friends and family described in careful, accumulated detail over the years that followed Susan's disappearance. He was also, in ways that would not become fully clear until later, deeply enmeshed with his father, Stephen, in ways that made the people close to Susan uneasy. On the morning of December 6th, 2009, Susan and her 2 sons attended church services at their local LDS congregation. They walked home afterward with Susan's friend Kiersey Hellawell. That afternoon, a neighbor named Giovanna Owings came by the Powell house to visit. The family had eaten together, pancakes and eggs, a Sunday meal. Susan was tired. She lay down on the couch around 5 o'clock in the afternoon to take a nap. Giovanna said goodbye and left. Josh, she noted, had said he was taking the boys out sledding. That was the last confirmed time anyone outside the immediate family saw Susan Powell alive. At some point that evening, the precise time is disputed and was never independently verified. Josh Powell loaded his 2 young sons, ages 4 and 2, into the family's Chrysler Town and Country minivan and drove out into the Utah West Desert. It was a Sunday night in December. There was a snowstorm moving through the region. The temperature was dropping. He later told police he had decided, spontaneously in the middle of the night, to take his boys camping along the Pony Express Trail in Toole County, roughly an hour and a half west of West Valley City, into a stretch of remote, high desert, dotted with abandoned mine shafts and crossed by a trail that almost no one uses in December. He said Susan had stayed home because she was tired. He said she had been fine when they left. He said he had no idea where she was. Here's what doesn't make sense about that story, starting from the very first sentence of it. It was snowing. It was late at night. His sons were 4 and 2 years old. No one who knew Susan Powell, not one of her friends, not one of her family members, believed for a single moment that she would have allowed Josh to take their toddlers into the winter desert in the middle of the night. Her closest friend, Kiersey Hellawell, said it directly. Susan would have never allowed him to ever take the boys out in the winter to the desert in the middle of the night. Never. I never believed his story at all. On the morning of December 7th, Charlie and Braden Powell did not arrive at daycare. Susan did not show up for work. Family members who tried to reach her got no answer. By that afternoon, Josh returned to the West Valley City house with the 2 boys. Police were already involved. Officers had entered the home that morning to check on the family's welfare before Josh returned. And what they found inside the house is where this case stops being a missing person story and becomes something else entirely. The carpet in one area of the house was wet. Someone had set up 2 fans aimed at the floor, apparently to dry it. On the tile, investigators found blood. Later forensic testing would confirm that one sample was Susan Powell's. A second blood sample in the house was attributed to an unknown male contributor and has never been publicly identified. The sofa, positioned near the area where the blood was found, appeared to have been recently cleaned. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of robbery. The house looked, in every other respect, exactly as it always had. Except for the wet carpet, the fans, the blood, and the couch that someone had wiped down. And then, in the days that followed, investigators found other things. Susan had multiple life insurance policies. The total value was eventually confirmed at approximately $1.5 million, with Josh Powell as the named beneficiary. Josh had filed for bankruptcy 2 years earlier with more than $200,000 in debt. He was, at the moment of his wife's disappearance, in serious financial trouble. And his wife's life was insured for a sum that would eliminate that trouble entirely. There was something else. Something that had been said at a Christmas party by Josh Powell to his co-workers in the period before Susan disappeared. He had talked, casually, in conversation at a work social event, about how a person could theoretically dispose of a body by throwing it down an abandoned mine shaft in the Utah desert. He had described the concept in enough detail that the people who heard it remembered it And then, when his wife disappeared, and he claimed to have driven into the desert on a snowy Sunday night with 2 toddlers for a camping trip. Those co-workers remembered what he had said. Police searched the Simpson Springs area of Toole County, the location Josh indicated he had taken the boys camping, on December 10th, 4 days after Susan disappeared. They found no evidence that a campsite had ever been used there. No fire ring, no tire tracks consistent with Josh's account, no physical evidence that anyone had been camping in that location in recent days. The snow that had fallen the night of December 6th had preserved the ground reasonably well. There was nothing there. Josh Powell was named a person of interest on December 16th. He had already hired a defense attorney and had declined to attend a 3rd interview with West Valley City Police. He was not cooperating. He was not, by any visible measure, behaving like a man whose wife was missing. When a reporter from a local television station caught up with him days after Susan disappeared, he stood outside his house and answered questions with a flatness that people who watched the footage found difficult to explain. He did not cry. He did not plead for information. He spoke about the situation with the same affect he might have used to describe a delayed package. In early January 2010, Josh packed up the West Valley City house, loaded his sons into the car, and drove to Puyallup, Washington, to move in with his father, Stephen Powell. He never lived in Utah again. The investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance did not end when Josh Powell left Utah. It followed him to Washington, expanded in ways no one had fully anticipated, and eventually produced revelations about the Powell family that reframed the entire case. While Susan herself remained missing, and the West Utah desert kept its silence. In Puyallup, Washington, Josh moved into his father Stephen Powell's house with Charlie and Braden. The family presented itself publicly as the wronged party. A man falsely suspected, a grandfather stepping up to help raise his grandsons, while police conducted a baseless investigation. Josh and Stephen launched a website called SusanPowell.org, which they described as Susan's official missing persons page, but which functioned primarily as a platform for their theory that Susan had not been harmed at all. They claimed she had run away voluntarily, that she had become romantically involved with a Utah man named Stephen Cooker, who had also gone missing in December 2009, and that the 2 of them had fled together to Brazil to start a new life. There was, as West Valley City Police stated publicly, zero evidence to support this theory. Stephen Kiker's timeline was later established as placing him in the Pacific Northwest when Susan disappeared. The Brazil story was fabricated. Josh and his father knew it was fabricated. They published it anyway. In the summer of 2011, the situation in Puyallup unraveled in a way that even the people following the case closely had not seen coming. Washington state investigators executed a search warrant on Stephen Powell's house. What they found there had nothing to do with Susan's disappearance directly, but it reframed everything that had been said about the Powell family in the preceding 2 years. Stephen Powell had been secretly filming women and girls in the neighborhood through their bathroom windows. Some of the subjects were children as young as 8 years old. Investigators also found voyeuristic recordings of Susan Powell, taken inside her own home without her knowledge by her father-in-law. Stephen Powell had been obsessing over his daughter-in-law for years. He had written diaries about her. He had composed songs about her. After his arrest, he gave a television interview in which he described his feelings for Susan in terms that stunned the people watching. He was charged with 14 counts of voyeurism and 1 count of child pornography. He was convicted and sentenced to prison. The custody of Charlie and Braden was transferred to Susan's parents, Chuck and Judy Cox, in the fall of 2011. It was the right outcome by any reasonable measure. Two young boys, growing up in a house where their grandfather had been secretly filming neighborhood children, with a father who remained the sole person of interest in their mother's disappearance. A Washington state family court judge ordered Josh Powell to undergo a psychosexual evaluation, including a polygraph test, before custody discussions could continue. Josh refused. He appealed. He lost. The court date was set. And then, on February 5, 2012, Josh Powell killed his sons. A social worker named Elizabeth Griffin Hall brought Charlie and Braden to Josh's rental house in Graham, Washington, for a court-ordered supervised visit. It was a Sunday afternoon. The boys ran from the car to the front door. Josh opened the door, let his sons inside, and immediately blocked the social worker from entering. She stood on the porch. She tried the door. She smelled gasoline. She could hear the boys crying inside. She called 911. She stood on the porch pounding on the door and the windows, and she was still standing there when the house exploded. Firefighters arrived 3 minutes later. The house was fully engulfed. Josh Powell and his two sons, Charlie, 7, and Braden, 5, were dead. The fire investigator determined that Josh had used a hatchet on the boys before igniting the accelerant. He had written a brief note to family members, sent before the visit, in which he said he could not continue and that he was sorry. He had prepared in advance. He had planned it. He took every answer with him. In the aftermath, the boys' attorney revealed that Charlie and Braden had, in the months before their deaths, begun telling their grandparents things they remembered from the night their mother disappeared. The oldest boy had talked about going camping. He said his mother had been in the trunk of the van. He said his mom and dad had gotten out of the car and mom had not come back. He had also told his grandparents, at different times, that his mother had stayed at Dinosaur National Park and that she was where the crystals are. Braden, who had been 2 years old on the night of December 6th, had drawn a picture of the family minivan with 3 figures inside. When asked why his mother was not in the drawing, he said she was in the trunk. These statements were made by children who were 4 and 2 years old on the night in question. They cannot be treated as forensic evidence in any courtroom. But they exist. They are documented. And they have never been explained by anyone who believed Josh Powell's account of events. West Valley City Police closed the official investigation into Susan Powell's disappearance in May 2013. The man they had always believed was responsible was dead. His brother, Michael Powell, who investigators had publicly named as a possible accomplice in the disposal of Susan's body, died by suicide in 2013 as well. Every person who might have had direct knowledge of what happened to Susan Powell on the night of December 6th, 2009, is now dead. The West Utah desert in the years since has not given anything back. In 2022, television personality Dave Sparks organized an excavation of a mine shaft in the area of the Simpson Springs campground that Josh had claimed to have visited the night Susan disappeared. The excavation found bones. The bones were tested. They were non-human. Susan was not there. There are thousands of abandoned mine shafts in the Utah West Desert. The terrain is vast and remote and largely unsearched. Josh Powell had, at a Christmas party, in front of witnesses, described exactly this method of concealment. He had driven into that desert on a snowy Sunday night with his 2 toddlers. His sons said their mother was in the trunk. The campsite he claimed to have used did not exist. And the blood on the floor of the West Valley City House, Susan's blood, and the blood of an unidentified male contributor, has never been fully explained. The Powell house in West Valley City no longer exists. The lot was eventually cleared. There is nothing left of it now. No house, no driveway, no physical remnant of the place where Susan Powell spent the last hours anyone can confirm she was alive. The neighbors have moved on. The street looks like every other street in West Valley City. Susan Powell has never been found. Susan Powell was a mother in a familiar suburb, in a house on a street like every other street. The next person on this list was a stranger in a new city. Someone who had been in Utah for 18 days, who did not yet know the streets well enough to walk home safely, and who disappeared on a sunny afternoon in full view of a busy college town without a single witness coming forward to say what they saw. April 16th, 2015. Provo, Utah. A Wednesday afternoon in early spring. Provo is a college town anchored by Brigham Young University, ringed by the Wasatch Mountains, and known for its particular combination of academic energy and tight-knit community. It is not a city where strangers feel invisible. It is not a city where a young woman walking 18 blocks through the middle of the afternoon should simply cease to exist. The streets between the Nomen Global Language School and the Branberry apartment complex on the city's west side are not remote. They are not isolated. They pass through populated neighborhoods, along roads that carry regular traffic, past businesses and residences, and the ordinary daytime movement of a functioning city. Elizabeth Elena Laguna Salgado had been in Provo for exactly 18 days. She was 26 years old. She had grown up in Chiapas, Mexico, in a family that she called every single day, not occasionally, not weekly, but every day. A phone call that her mother, Libertad, had come to count on the way you count on the sun coming up. Elizabeth was a returned LDS missionary, someone who had spent years in dedicated service before deciding that her next step was to learn English and build something new. She had been accepted to the Nomen Global Language School at 384 West Center Street, and in late March 2015, she had arrived in Provo and moved into an apartment at the Branberry complex with roommates. She dove into her classes immediately. She found a part-time job at a local restaurant. She began attending church at a nearby ward. She was, by every account, from the people who knew her in those 18 days, purposeful and warm and entirely focused on the future she was building. Her shoes were by the door of her apartment when she left for class that morning. She took nothing with her that suggested she was going anywhere other than school and then home. She was, in every visible way, a woman in the middle of a normal day. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon on April 16th, Elizabeth finished her classes at Nomen Global. Her classmates watched her leave the school building at 384 West Center Street and head in the direction of her apartment. That is the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Elena Laguna Salgado. She was 18 blocks from home, on foot, in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, in a busy college town. She did not arrive. By dinner time, her roommates were trying to reach her. No answer. Her phone rang and rang. Her roommates drove to the school. A janitor confirmed she had left at the usual time. They came back to the apartment and looked at her room. Her purse was on the desk. Her wallet was inside it. Her shoes were still neatly placed by the door. The ones she had left behind that morning, not the ones she was wearing, but the detail of the shoes sitting there, waiting for a person who was not coming back, is the kind of thing that people who investigated this case have never stopped describing. There was no sign of packing, no sign of planning, no sign that Elizabeth had intended to go anywhere other than the 18-block walk between her school and the place where she slept. Her family in Chiapas tried to reach her that evening and got nothing. By the following morning, when she had missed church activities and her restaurant shift and had still not answered any calls, her roommates contacted the Provo Police Department. A missing persons report was filed. The investigation began. Here's the critical detail about the geography of what happened next. The Provo Police Department spent the following 3 years conducting what their chief described as thousands and thousands of hours of investigative work. They reviewed security camera footage from businesses along Elizabeth's likely route home. They interviewed classmates, co-workers, church members, and neighbors. They canvassed the neighborhoods between the school and her apartment repeatedly. They coordinated with the FBI, who at one point traveled to Mexico to interview family members and investigate leads in Chiapas. A reward was offered and increased over time, eventually reaching $50,000. Elizabeth Smart, herself a survivor of abduction in Salt Lake City, who had become an advocate for missing persons, held a public press conference pleading for information. For 3 years, the answer was the same: nothing. No witnesses came forward with anything useful from that Wednesday afternoon. No security camera captured Elizabeth after she left the school building. No one reported seeing anything unusual on the streets between Nome and Global and the Branbury. In a city with a university, a functioning police department, an active church community, and a $50,000 reward posted for information, 18 blocks of a Wednesday afternoon produced no answers at all. Then, on the morning of May 18th, 2018, 3 years, 1 month, and 2 days after Elizabeth Salgado walked out of her classroom, a man driving through Hobble Creek Canyon pulled over to the side of a dirt road. He had stopped to relieve himself. He stepped off the road into the brush, and a few feet into the tree line, he found a skull and clothing. He called the authorities. Hobble Creek Canyon is approximately 15 miles from the center of Provo. It is a forested canyon east of the city, used by hikers and campers and people looking for a quiet drive in the mountains. The spot where the man stopped his car was a roadside pull-off. Not a trailhead, not a marked parking area, just a place where the road widened slightly and a car could stop. The remains were found approximately 30 feet from the edge of the road, in a low area of brush that was not visible from the roadway unless you were standing right at the tree line. The Utah County Sheriff's Office secured the site and spent Friday and Saturday collecting the remains. On May 23rd, dental records confirmed the identification. The remains were those of Elizabeth Elena Laguna Salgado. The case was immediately reclassified as a homicide. Now this is where it stops being a missing person story and becomes something else. Something with no clean edges and no resolution. The Utah County Sheriff's Office held a press conference at which Sheriff Jim Tracy confirmed the identification and stated that investigators were treating the death as suspicious. He said the location of the remains, the specific nature of the site, close to a road but deliberately off it, in a spot not visible from the road, led investigators to conclude that she had not ended up there by accident. She had been placed there. Someone with a vehicle had driven her body to that canyon and left her in that spot, 30 feet from the road, and then driven away. The man who found her was not considered a suspect. He had, by the assessment of investigators, simply stopped at the right place at the right moment. Retired Sergeant Spencer Cannon, who was present at the scene the day Elizabeth was found, described it plainly years later. He stopped to go to the bathroom. He answered nature's call, If he had stopped 50 yards one way or another, we would be having a different conversation. Here's what doesn't make sense, and what has driven the people closest to this case to a particular kind of anguish in the years since. Deputies from the Utah County Sheriff's Office had been driving through Hobble Creek Canyon repeatedly during those 3 years of active searching. They had driven past that pull-off dozens of times. The remains were 30 feet from the road in light brush. For 3 years, Elizabeth Salgado's body was 15 miles from where she was last seen, in a canyon that was searched, near a road that was driven by the investigators looking for her. And no one stopped at the right place until a stranger pulled over on a Friday morning in May 2018. The forensic investigation that followed produced almost nothing useful. The final results, released in 2020, confirmed that there was no identifiable cause of death and no determinable time of death. The remains were too decomposed after 3 years in the elements to provide the kind of evidence that builds a prosecution. There were no useful prints, no useful DNA from the body itself, no weapon, no witnesses, no surveillance, no suspect. The investigation was technically still active, but the evidence base was nearly empty. Then, in 2021, something small and strange surfaced. Investigators announced that a coin had been recovered from the site where Elizabeth's remains were found. A coin that carried DNA that did not belong to Elizabeth and did not match any known contributor in the case. A coin in a wooded pull-off 15 miles from where she was last seen, with someone else's DNA on it. That coin is currently in an evidence bag somewhere in the Utah County system. It has not, as of the most recent reporting, publicly led to a named suspect or an arrest. Elizabeth Salgado had been in Utah for 18 days. She had no enemies. She had no complicated history in the state. She was 6,000 miles from home, in a city she was still learning to navigate, walking 18 blocks in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. Whoever took her knew that route, or knew her, or was simply in the right place to intercept someone who was alone and knew, and didn't know yet which streets to avoid. Her family in Chiapas has now spent 10 years without an answer. Her mother, Libertad, who used to wait for Elizabeth's daily phone call, described it simply: all these years have been filled with suffering. There has been no arrest. There has been no named suspect. The pull-off in Hobble Creek Canyon where her remains were found is unmarked. There is nothing there to indicate what happened. The canyon road still carries traffic. Hikers still park at the pull-offs. The coin is still in the evidence bag. Elizabeth Salgado disappeared in a city with thousands of witnesses and left no trail for anyone to follow. The next person on this list disappeared inside one of the most heavily staffed, most visited national parks in the United States. 4 million visitors a year, rangers on every trail, shuttles running on schedules, and somehow, impossibly, managed to stay missing for 12 days in a canyon that most people can walk end to end in an afternoon. October 6th, 2020. Zion National Park, southwestern Utah. It is a Tuesday morning in early fall, and the canyon is busy the way Zion Canyon is always busy. Shuttles running their loops between the visitor center and the trailheads, hikers and clusters at every pullout. Rangers stationed at the key access points, the Virgin River audible below the road. Zion is not a wilderness in the way that Davis Gulch was a wilderness, or the way the Uinta backcountry is a wilderness. It is a managed, monitored, heavily trafficked national park that receives approximately 4 million visitors every year. The trails are marked. The shuttles run on a published schedule. There are rangers who know the terrain the way cab drivers know city blocks. It is, in the most literal sense, one of the most watched pieces of landscape in the American West. Holly Suzanne Cordier was 38 years old. She was from Woodland Hills, California, a suburb of Los Angeles. She had visited Zion National Park before, multiple times by her daughter's account, and was described as an experienced, physically fit hiker. She was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed approximately 100 pounds. She had recently lost her job as a nanny due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which had been grinding through its first brutal year. She arrived at Zion in early October 2020 and arranged a private shuttle to take her into the canyon. At approximately 1:30 in the afternoon on October 6th, Holly Cordier was dropped off at the Grotto, one of the busiest access points in Zion Canyon, a trailhead hub where the Kayenta Trail and the Trail to Angel's Landing both originate, located in the heart of the canyon, with the Virgin River running directly alongside it. It is not a remote location. It is not a trailhead you reach after a long approach through empty country. It is a place where, on any given day, hundreds of people are moving through within the span of a few hours. Holly stepped off the shuttle at the Grotto at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon and disappeared into the canyon. She did not return for her shuttle pickup. When the shuttle checked and she was not there, a missing persons report was initiated. By the following day, a full search operation was underway, involving Zion National Park rangers, the Washington County Sheriff's Office, and search and rescue volunteers. The search would continue, actively, for 12 days. Here's the critical detail about what those 12 days looked like. Zion Canyon, in the area around the Grotto and the Virgin River, is not a place where a person can easily become lost and stay lost. The canyon has walls. It runs in a roughly linear direction. The river provides orientation. The shuttle road runs through the bottom of the canyon and serves as a constant reference point. There are other hikers on most of the trails in that section of the park every single day, including in October. The search teams deployed by the Park Service and the Sheriff's Office were experienced, well-equipped, and familiar with the terrain. They covered the area around the Grotto and the Virgin River repeatedly. They used trained search dogs. They called out. They checked the alcoves and the side drainages and the areas of thick riverside vegetation where someone might shelter. For 12 days, they found nothing. The cost of the search exceeded $60,000. That figure comes not from the Park Service's voluntary disclosure, but from documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the Salt Lake Tribune and other news organizations after Holly was found. Those documents were released in March 2021, almost entirely redacted. The primary search report, 10 pages long, was blacked out except for a handful of disconnected phrases. The investigative report was withheld in its entirety. A recorded interview with Holly Cordier, conducted after her recovery, was referenced in the documents but not released. The identity of the person who provided the tip that led to her recovery was redacted. The content of that tip was redacted. What searchers found when they located her and what condition she was in was redacted. On October 18th, 12 days after she had stepped off the shuttle at the Grotto, the Park Service received a tip from a visitor who reported seeing a woman matching Holly's description near the Virgin River. Search teams responded to that location and found her. She was alive. Her family arrived at the park, and Holly left with them almost immediately, without undergoing any medical evaluation, without being treated at a hospital, without providing, as far as the public record shows, any detailed account to the Park Service of where she had been and how she had survived 12 days in a canyon that hundreds of people were moving through every day. Now this is where it stops being a straightforward search and rescue story and becomes something that law enforcement apparently felt warranted a closer look. The Washington County Sheriff's Office opened a follow-up investigation into the circumstances of Holly Courtier's disappearance and recovery. The fact of that investigation, a law enforcement agency deciding that a person found alive after going missing in a national park required further scrutiny, is itself significant. Sheriff's offices do not routinely investigate rescued hikers. They investigate situations where the account provided by the person involved does not fully align with the established facts, or where something about the circumstances raises questions that a missing persons report alone doesn't answer. What specifically prompted the Washington County investigation has never been publicly disclosed. The investigative report generated by that inquiry is among the documents that remain either withheld or heavily redacted as of the most recent reporting. But here's what doesn't make sense when you lay the known facts out in sequence. Holly Courtier was dropped off at one of the busiest points in one of the most visited national parks in the country. She vanished from that location and could not be found for 12 days, despite an active, professional, well-resourced search operating in a canyon with walls and a river and a road running through it. She was found near the Virgin River, the same general area where she had entered the park. She left without medical evaluation. The documents describing what happened to her are almost entirely blacked out. A law enforcement agency opened an investigation into her story, and the person who tipped off the Park Service to her location, the person whose information ended the 12-day search, has never been publicly identified. There are 3 theories that have circulated in the years since, and it is important to be clear that all of them are unconfirmed. The first is the most straightforward, that Holly suffered some kind of injury or medical episode shortly after entering the canyon, became disoriented, and sheltered in place near the river in an area that searchers somehow repeatedly missed. The second theory is that the disappearance was, at least in part, voluntary. That Holly was going through a significant life crisis, having recently lost her job during a pandemic, and that she made a choice at some point during those 12 days that she later did not fully disclose. The third theory, the one that sits most uncomfortably, is simply that something happened in Zion National Park in October 2020 that has not been publicly disclosed, and that the redacted documents, the Washington County investigation, and the absence of a medical evaluation are not coincidences, but related pieces of a picture that has been deliberately withheld. None of these theories can currently be confirmed or ruled out, because the primary evidence, the investigative report, the recorded interview, the search narrative, remains sealed. The Virgin River moves through Zion Canyon the same way it always has, indifferent to the questions that have accumulated around it. The NPS investigative report exists in a filing system somewhere. The recorded interview of Holly Courtier exists on a storage medium somewhere. Neither has been made public. The $60,000 search is documented in the budget records of the National Park Service. 12 days in a canyon that 4 million people visit every year, and the official account of what happened during those 12 days remains. As of today, a set of black lines on a mostly blank page. That canyon has walls, and a river, and a road, and 4 million visitors a year. The Uinta Mountains have none of those things. They have elevation and distance and weather and silence. And for an experienced hiker who knew exactly what he was doing, that turned out to be more than enough. Brian Robinson was an Australian man who came to Utah to hike the high Wintas Wilderness in the summer of 2011. He was experienced. He was prepared. He took 77 photographs during his trek, documenting the wildlife and the landscape and the long views across the high country above 11,000 feet. He encountered at least 3 other people on the trail: sheep herders who saw him, spoke to him, and watched him continue along the route. And then he left the marked trail for reasons that have never been fully established, and attempted to cross an unnamed saddle on a crumbling ridgeline and died. That much is documented. What is not documented, what was actively concealed from the public for years, is what investigators found at the cliff above where his body came to rest. A rope. Hanging from the cliff face, directly above the location where Brian Robinson's body was found, was a rope. Summit County Sheriff's Office personnel discovered it during their investigation in 2011. They photographed it. They logged it. And then, according to records obtained by KSL as part of their Uinta Triangle podcast investigation published in 2025, they chose not to disclose its existence publicly. For years, the official account of Brian Robinson's death was a backcountry accident, an experienced hiker who misjudged a crossing and fell. The rope was not mentioned. The rope was not part of the public narrative. The rope sat in an evidence log while the case was considered closed. The rope's origin has never been established. Whether it belonged to Robinson, whether it was left by another climber on a previous visit, whether it played any role in what happened on that ridgeline, none of that has been publicly answered. What has been answered by the 2025 investigation is that the decision to withhold this information was deliberate, and that the 3 sheep herders who had seen Robinson alive on the trail, the last people confirmed to have encountered him before he died, did not share that information with searchers during the active search period. Why they stayed silent is not publicly known. Whether their account, when it eventually emerged, changed the understanding of what happened to Brian Robinson on that unnamed saddle is not publicly known either. The cliff is still unmarked on trail maps. The rope is still listed in an evidence log. The high Uintas Wilderness continues to receive hikers every summer who have no idea that the question of what happened there in 2011 has never been fully answered. The mountains told us where Brian Robinson was eventually. In 1977, a young woman disappeared from a Salt Lake City college campus in the middle of the day, and the canyon gave back only what it chose to give back, which was not nearly enough. May 5th, 1977, Salt Lake City, Utah. A Thursday. The city is still cool in early May, the Wasatch Range holding the last of its winter snow on the higher peaks, the streets below going about their ordinary business. The LDS Business College occupies a campus in the heart of the city, a small, tight-knit institution where students know each other, where the rhythms of the school day are predictable and familiar, where a young woman finishing her classes and heading out to meet a friend for shopping is the most ordinary thing imaginable. Valaine Briggs was 18 years old. She was a student at LDS Business College, enrolled in the kind of practical coursework that was designed to lead directly into a working life. Secretarial skills, business fundamentals, the kind of education that had a clear purpose and a clear direction. Her friends and family described her as responsible and social, someone who kept her commitments, who showed up when she said she would. She had plans that Thursday afternoon. After her last class, she was supposed to meet her roommate. They were going shopping. It was the kind of plan that 18-year-olds make dozens of times a semester. Casual, specific, completely ordinary. Her roommate waited. Verlaine Briggs never arrived. She was last seen leaving her class at LDS Business College on May 5, 1977. After that, the record goes silent. 2 days later, on May 7th, her body was found in Lambs Canyon. Lambs Canyon cuts east into the Wasatch Range approximately 20 minutes from downtown Salt Lake City. A rugged drainage of steep walls and dense brush and deep off-trail zones that most people who drive past on Interstate 80 never think about. It is not a remote location in the sense that Davis Gulch or the High Uintas are remote. It is 20 minutes from the city center, accessible by road. But the canyon itself has depth and cover and stretches of terrain where a person could be hidden and not easily found. Her school books were with her body when she was found. She had been carrying them when she was taken. Here's the critical detail about those books and about what they tell us. When a person is abducted, when someone takes them by surprise, quickly, without warning, they do not have time to set things down. Verlaine Briggs left her campus carrying her school books. She was taken while she was still in the middle of her day, mid-routine, with her hands full of the ordinary material of her student life. She did not drop the books and run. She did not set them down and try to escape. The books went with her to Lambs Canyon, which means that whatever happened happened fast, in a public place, in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The distance between LDS Business College and Lambs Canyon requires a vehicle to cover. It is not a walk. It is not a short distance that someone might travel on foot. Whoever took Verlaine Briggs had a car, and they knew where they were going. And they drove her 20 minutes out of the city and into the canyon. Verlaine Briggs did not have a car of her own. She had no reason to be in Lambs Canyon. The only explanation for how she ended up there is that someone else took her there. The investigation that followed confirmed what the physical evidence suggested, that Verlaine Briggs had been murdered. Her death was classified as a homicide. The case was opened and investigated by Salt Lake City police. And then, across the following 4 decades, it went cold. No suspect was ever publicly identified. No arrest was ever made. No one was ever charged in connection with the death of Verlaine Briggs. The case sits in the Utah Department of Public Safety Cold Case Database, listed as an unsolved homicide, and it has been sitting there for 48 years. Whatever DNA evidence was collected at the time, and the forensic capabilities of 1977 were a fraction of what they are today, has never been publicly reported to have produced a match. No witness has ever come forward to say they saw something on the street near LDS Business College that Thursday afternoon. No one has ever named a person. No one has ever been held responsible. What doesn't make sense, when you hold the facts together, is the visibility of it. LDS Business College in the middle of a Thursday afternoon is not a deserted place. Students are moving between buildings. Faculty are present. The surrounding streets carry regular traffic. Verlaine Briggs walked out of her last class of the day in a populated, functioning campus environment, presumably heading toward wherever she was meeting her roommate, and was taken quickly enough, completely enough, that no one appears to have seen anything useful. Or if they did, no one ever said so publicly. Her school books are still listed as evidence in the case file. Her killer has never been named. 48 years of silence in a case where the physical evidence told investigators clearly that a crime had occurred, that a vehicle had been used, that a specific canyon had been chosen, and still no answer, no accountability, No resolution for the family she left behind. Now this is where the list turns to a case that is, in a particular way, even more opaque, because with Verlaine Briggs, we at least have a body, a location, a confirmed homicide, and a case file. The next person on this list gave investigators almost nothing to work with. No confirmed location, no confirmed cause of death, no confirmed timeline. Just a woman who left her child at home in late 1994, and a set of witnesses who say they know what happened to her, and a river that has never given her back. Bobby Campbell disappeared in late 1994 from the Salt Lake area. The details of her background, her exact age, the full circumstances of her life at the time, the specific date she was last seen, are partially unknown from the available public record. And it is important to say that clearly, because in a case this sparse, the temptation to fill gaps with assumption is one that the facts do not support. What is documented is this: Bobby Campbell left her child at home. She walked out or drove out, or was taken from wherever she was, the record is not specific, and she was never seen again. Her child was left behind. No one reported seeing her after she left. No one reported seeing anything unusual. She was simply gone. In the years that followed, the Utah Cold Case Coalition and a private investigator working on behalf of Bobby's family began tracking down witnesses. People from her life in 1994 who had been present for things they had not initially told police. What those witnesses eventually described was specific and disturbing. According to multiple accounts gathered by the coalition and the family investigator. And it is essential to note that these accounts have not been independently verified by law enforcement and have not resulted in any charges. Bobby Campbell died of a drug overdose. And after she died, the people who were with her did not call for help. Instead, according to these accounts, they wrapped her body in a rug or carpet and carried her to the Jordan River and threw her in. The Jordan River runs through the Salt Lake Valley for approximately 50 miles, cutting through residential neighborhoods and commercial corridors and parks, a flat, slow-moving waterway that is not particularly deep but carries enough current to move things downstream. If what the witnesses described is accurate, Bobby Campbell's body entered that river in 1994 and has not surfaced in the 30 years since. Dive teams, organized by the Cold Case Coalition and family investigators, have searched sections of the river. They have recovered items that were believed to possibly be linked to Bobby Campbell. None of those items have been definitively confirmed as belonging to her. She has not been found. Here's what doesn't make sense about the silence around this case. The witnesses who provided the carpet and river account did so to private investigators and the Cold Case Coalition, not to law enforcement. Or if they did speak to law enforcement. Nothing in the public record indicates that their accounts were acted on in a way that produced results. These are people who, if the accounts are accurate, have direct knowledge of what happened to a woman who has been missing for 30 years and whose child grew up without her. They have names. They exist. And yet Bobby Campbell remains officially missing, officially unresolved, with no charges, no arrests, no confirmation of what happened. The Jordan River runs through a public park now, in several of the stretches near where she may have been thrown in. The riverbank has been developed and improved over the decades, landscaped and paved and turned into the kind of recreational corridor that city planners build. Joggers run the path. Cyclists ride alongside the water. The river moves quietly below, carrying whatever it carries, keeping whatever it has been asked to keep. Her child, the one she left at home before she disappeared, has grown up now. 30 years have passed. There has been no resolution. The case is still listed in the cold case database. The river has never given anything back that confirmed what the witnesses say they know. Bobby Campbell disappeared in an adult world in circumstances that are only partially known. The next person on this list was 6 years old, and her disappearance happened in broad daylight, from the kind of place where children are supposed to be safe. And the file that carries her name has been open for 30 years without a single public answer. August 13th, 1995. Salt Lake City, Utah. A Sunday in the middle of summer. The city is hot and flat and bright. The kind of day where the light comes off the pavement in waves and the mountains to the east look bleached and far away. It is the kind of day where children are outside, where apartment complexes are alive with the ordinary noise of families and neighbors and summer routines, where nothing feels hidden or dangerous because everything is visible in the full glare of an August afternoon. Rosie Tapia was 6 years old. She lived at an apartment complex in Salt Lake City with her family. She was a child in the middle of summer, in a familiar place surrounded by the people and routines of her daily life. The kind of setting that carries its own implicit guarantee of safety. An apartment complex is not an isolated wilderness. It is not a deserted parking lot late at night or a remote canyon trail with no other hikers. It is a residential community with neighbors in adjacent units, with parking lots visible from windows, with the constant low-level human presence that makes a place feel watched and known and safe. On August 13th, 1995, Rosie Tapia was kidnapped from her home at that apartment complex. She was 6 years old. She was never found. The details of her abduction, the specific circumstances of how she was taken, who was seen in the area, what witnesses reported in the immediate aftermath, are only partially available in the public record. And it is important to acknowledge that directly. The Utah Department of Public Safety Cold Case database lists Rosie Tapia as a missing endangered person. The Utah Cold Case Coalition has maintained active interest in the case. Local media has covered the anniversary of her disappearance in the years since. But the granular specifics of the abduction itself, who was seen, what was observed, what physical evidence was collected at the scene, have not been fully detailed in publicly available reporting. And in a case involving a child and a family that has carried this without resolution for 30 years, it would be irresponsible to fill those gaps with speculation. What the public record does establish is this. A 6-year-old girl was taken from a residential apartment complex in Salt Lake City in broad daylight in the middle of summer. No perpetrator has ever been publicly identified. No arrest has ever been made. No remains have ever been found. The case has been open for 30 years. Here's the critical detail about what 30 years of silence means in a case like this. A child abduction in a residential complex in 1995 would have generated immediate, intensive law enforcement response. Officers would have canvassed every unit. They would have interviewed every neighbor who was home that afternoon. They would have collected physical evidence from the area. They would have circulated descriptions and photographs. In an apartment complex, where people live in close proximity and share common spaces, the likelihood that no one saw anything at all is low. Someone saw something on August 13th, 1995. Whether what they saw registered as significant in the moment, whether they reported it, whether what they reported was useful, the answers to those questions are not publicly known. 30 years have passed since Rosie Tapia disappeared. The people who were children in that complex in 1995 are adults in their 30s and 40s now. The people who were adults then are elderly or gone. The physical landscape of that neighborhood in Salt Lake City has changed. The apartment complex still stands, but the community of people who lived there that summer is long since scattered in every direction. That 30 years of ordinary life will scatter people. The trail, in the truest sense, is not just cold. It is a generation old. The file is still open. Rosie Tapia has never been found. There has never been a named suspect. There has never been an arrest. There has never been a public answer to the question of what happened to a 6-year-old girl in a familiar place on a summer Sunday afternoon. Her name is in the database. Her case is listed as active. And that is, in its way, the most honest summary of where things stand, not resolved, not abandoned, just endlessly, quietly open. The way cold cases stay open when there is no answer to close them. The apartment complex where she lived still stands. Children still play in the parking lots and common areas of that neighborhood in summer. 30 years later, the question of what happened to Rosie Tapia remains exactly where it was on August 14th, 1995. The morning after she disappeared, unanswered, unresolved and waiting. Rosie Tapia has never been found. The last person on this list has also never been found. But in her case, unlike Rosie's, we have a confession, we have a name, we have a specific account of what happened and who was responsible. We have physical evidence that places the perpetrator at the scene. We have a bone fragment that may be hers. We have a key that proves everything. What we do not have is Deborah Kent. November 8th, 1974. Bountiful, Utah. A Friday evening, cool and dark. The kind of night that settles early in northern Utah in November when the mountains cut off the last of the afternoon light before 5 o'clock. Viewmont High School is lit from within, the parking lot filling with the cars of parents and students arriving for the evening school play. It is a community event, the kind that draws families out on a Friday night, couples and siblings and grandparents, people who would not otherwise be in the same place at the same time, gathered together in a high school auditorium to watch their kids perform. Deborah Jean Kent was 17 years old. She had come to the play with her family, her parents and her brother, who was somewhere in the building. She was a Viewmont High student, known to the people around her as responsible and family-oriented. The kind of teenager whose presence at a school play with her parents was completely unremarkable. She sat in the auditorium as the performance began. At some point during the show, she got up from her seat, excused herself quietly, and stepped out into the corridor. She was going to find her brother. He had gone outside earlier, and she wanted to check on him. She walked out of the auditorium and into the hallway, and then, presumably, out into the November night. She never came back to her seat. When her family realized she had been gone too long, they looked for her in the building. They checked the bathrooms, the corridors, the lobby. They went outside to the parking lot. The parking lot was partially lit, cars sitting in rows in the November dark, and somewhere in that parking lot, they found her keys. Just her keys on the ground, in the lot outside Viewmont High School. No Deborah, no sign of a struggle, no witnesses who had seen anything. Just the keys, lying there in the dark, as if she had dropped them on her way to or from a car that was never hers. And that's the last confirmed time anyone saw Deborah Kent alive. walking out of the Viewmont High School auditorium to look for her brother on the night of November 8th, 1974. Here's what was happening elsewhere in the Salt Lake Valley on that same evening. Because the timing is not a coincidence, and the connection between the two events is the piece of evidence that eventually anchored everything that followed. Earlier that same night, approximately 2 hours before Deborah Kent disappeared from the Viewmont parking lot, a man had approached a teenage girl named Carol Durant at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah, 20 miles to the south. He had identified himself as a police officer. He had told her that someone had tried to break into her car. He had persuaded her to get into his vehicle. Once she was inside, he had driven to a deserted area and attempted to handcuff her. She had fought back, thrown open the car door, and escaped onto the road, where a passing couple stopped and helped her. She survived. She described her attacker as a young man, attractive and well-groomed, who had been driving a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. 2 hours later, Deborah Kent's keys were on the ground outside Viewmont High School. She was gone. The man who had attacked Carol Durant was Ted Bundy. Now this is where the case turns to something that requires a moment to absorb. Bundy had moved to Salt Lake City in September of 1974. Nancy Wilcox had been his first victim in Utah, taken from a suburban street in Holiday on the night of October 1st. In the weeks that followed, 2 more young women, Melissa Smith and Laura Amy, had been abducted and murdered in the Salt Lake Valley. On the night of November 8th, Bundy had attempted to take Carol Durant at the mall and failed. She had escaped. She had gotten away from him, and he had driven away from that encounter with nothing. He needed to recover what he had lost, the control, the completion of what he had begun. He needed another victim. He drove north from Murray toward Bountiful. He had, at some point that evening, also been inside the Viewmont High School auditorium. Teachers and staff would later recall a young man who had appeared that night and positioned himself in the lobby and corridors of the school, moving through the space as though he belonged there, speaking to people, watching the movement of students and family members. One staff member recalled that he had behaved something like an usher: helpful, calm, unremarkable, present. He had been watching the people in that building for some time before Deborah Kent stood up from her seat and walked out to find her brother. He was waiting in the parking lot when she came outside. The parking lot outside Viewmont High School on the night of November 8th, 1974, was not empty. There were other cars. There were other people arriving and leaving throughout the evening. The ordinary traffic of a school event on a Friday night in a residential suburb. And yet, no one reported seeing anything. No one reported a struggle. No one reported a young woman being forced into a car, or a young man acting strangely in the lot, or a Volkswagen Beetle leaving in a hurry. Deborah Kent's keys were on the ground, and the parking lot had nothing else to offer. The investigation that followed was shaped by the same institutional failure that had hampered the Nancy Wilcox case 6 weeks earlier. In October 1974, when Nancy vanished from Holiday, police had classified her as a runaway and done almost nothing for 30 days. By November, the situation in Utah had escalated to the point where law enforcement could no longer dismiss what was happening. 2 more young women, Melissa Smith and Laura Amy, had been murdered. And Carol Durant had survived an abduction attempt and given police a description of her attacker. But the connection between these cases and the connection to Nancy Wilcox was not yet fully established. Nobody in Bountiful on the night of November 8th understood that the man who had walked through the Viewmont High School auditorium earlier that evening was the same man who had attacked Carol Durant at the Fashion Place Mall 2 hours before. By the time that connection was made, Deborah Kent had been missing for months. In the spring of 1975, a small patella bone fragment, a piece of the kneecap, was discovered near Aspen Grove in Utah County, in the mountains south of Salt Lake City. The fragment was tentatively linked to Deborah Kent. The forensic analysis available in 1975 was limited by the technology of the era, and the identification was never made with the kind of certainty that would have held up in a modern courtroom. The bone fragment was too degraded, too small, too isolated from any other physical context to provide a definitive answer. It remains, in the official record, a probable but unconfirmed association. It is the only physical remnant that has ever been linked to Deborah Kent in the 40 years since she disappeared. The rest of her has never been found. The physical evidence that conclusively places Ted Bundy at Viewmont High School on the night of November 8, 1974, did not come from the parking lot where Deborah's keys were found. It came from an object that Bundy himself described in one of his pre-execution confessions, with a specificity that investigators were able to verify. He told police that after abducting Deborah Kent, he had thrown a key into the field behind Viewmont High School, a specific key, from a specific set of handcuffs, a kneecap lock that matched the handcuffs he had used on Carol Durant earlier that same evening. Durant had escaped with one cuff still attached to her wrist. When she was rescued, the cuff was still there. The key that matched that lock had been thrown by Bundy into the field behind the school. Investigators searched the field. They found the key. It was exactly where Bundy said it would be. A kneecap key from a set of handcuffs, lying in the field behind Viewmont High School, physically matching the cuff that Carol Durant had worn on her wrist the night she escaped. The key had been there since November of 1974. This was not a circumstantial connection or a probabilistic link. This was a physical object, described by the perpetrator in specific terms, found in the specific location he described, matching the specific piece of evidence carried by the specific person who had survived his attack earlier the same evening. It was, in its way, one of the most precise pieces of forensic confirmation in the entire Bundy case. And it told investigators everything about what had happened to Deborah Kent. Everything, that is, except where she was. Bundy was arrested in Utah in 1975 on unrelated charges stemming from the Carol Durant abduction, for which Durant herself provided testimony. He was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to prison. He escaped twice. He was eventually captured in Florida, where he committed additional murders and was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Throughout the years of his imprisonment and the legal proceedings that followed, the question of what he had done with the women he had killed in Utah remained largely unanswered. He did not confess to the Utah murders until 1989, in the final days before his execution. And even then, the confessions were, as Ann Rule and other investigators noted, selective, vague in the places that mattered most, and potentially designed to mislead. In his confession regarding Deborah Kent, Bundy confirmed that he had taken her from the Viewmont parking lot on the night of November 8th. He did not provide a precise location for her remains. The area near Aspen Grove, where the bone fragment had been found, is consistent with areas that Bundy used to dispose of victims in Utah during this period. Remote enough to be unlikely to be discovered quickly, accessible enough to reach by car on a night drive from the Salt Lake Valley. But the precise location of Deborah Kent's remains has never been established. The bone fragment near Aspen Grove is the only physical marker that has ever placed her anywhere after the parking lot. Now this is where the case carries a particular weight that separates it from the others on this list, even the others that involve Bundy. Because we know more about what happened to Deborah Kent than we know about almost any other person in this episode. We have a confession. We have the kneecap key. We have Carol Durant's testimony. We have the staff member's recollection of a young man moving through the Viewmont auditorium that evening, watching the crowd. We have the bone fragment. We have, in short, more confirmed, documented, forensically anchored evidence for this case than for almost any other disappearance on this list. And still she has never been found. Still, after 50 years, the official record can tell you what happened and who did it and approximately where she was taken, and cannot tell you where she is. Here's the detail about that evening that tends to stay with people when they hear it. Ted Bundy was inside the Viewmont High School auditorium before Deborah Kent disappeared. He had been there for some time. Staff remembered him. He was calm and presentable and entirely unremarkable, the way he always was, the way that had allowed him to move through public spaces without triggering alarm in the people around him. He sat in the dark of that auditorium, surrounded by families watching their children perform. And he watched the crowd. He identified Deborah Kent. He watched her long enough to know what she looked like and where she was sitting and how she moved. And then, at some point, he got up and walked out to the parking lot and waited. That is what the evidence establishes. Not a random encounter, not an opportunistic grab in the parking lot, but a predatory selection made inside a brightly lit auditorium full of people, a choice made in public, in plain sight, at a school event on a Friday night, by a man who understood that the crowd around him was not protection, but cover. Deborah Kent walked out to find her brother, and Bundy was in the parking lot when she got there. Her keys were on the ground. She was gone. The play continued inside. The investigation has never formally closed. Deborah Kent is still listed as a missing person in the official records because her remains have never been definitively recovered and identified. The bone fragment from Aspen Grove sits in an evidence file. The kneecap key that Bundy described, the one found in the field behind the school, was among the evidence used to build the case that eventually put him in front of a jury. It served its legal purpose. It helped convict him of Carol Durant's abduction. And it confirmed, beyond any reasonable argument, that on the night of November 8, 1974, Ted Bundy was in the parking lot outside Viewmont High School. Deborah Kent was 17 years old. She went to find her brother. The brother was not in the parking lot. He had come back inside through a different entrance, and by the time the family realized Deborah was gone, the lot was quiet, and her keys were on the asphalt, and there was nothing left to find. 50 years later, her remains have never been recovered. The Viewmont High School parking lot is still there. The field behind the school where Bundy threw the key is still there, ordinary and unremarkable. The kind of scrubby grass and dirt field that sits behind suburban schools everywhere. Nobody walking past it now would know what was thrown there on a November night in 1974, or what it proved, or what it could not bring back. The auditorium where Bundy sat and watched the crowd is still there too. School plays still happen. Families still come out on Friday nights to watch their kids perform. The lights go down and the stage lights come up, and the audience settles into the particular comfortable darkness of a school auditorium and watches. And the case of Deborah Jean Kent remains exactly where it has been since November 9th, 1974. open, unresolved, and waiting for a location that has never been given. Pull back, widen the frame. Imagine the map of Utah the way you would see it from altitude, the way a pilot sees it, or the way it appears in satellite imagery on a clear day with no clouds. The Great Salt Lake in the northwest, reduced now to a fraction of its historical size, its shoreline retreating year by year across the flats. The Wasatch Front running north to south like a spine. The cities pressed against the mountains in a narrow corridor where most of the state's population lives within a few miles of each other. Then east and south. The landscape opening into something that has no easy parallel anywhere else in the continental United States. The Colorado Plateau, the Canyon Country, the Red Rock Formations and the Slot Canyons and the high desert mesas that stretch toward the horizon in every direction, without a road or a building or a power line to interrupt them. The Uinta Mountains pushing north, the only major range in the lower 48 that runs east to west instead of north to south. Their high ridgelines above 11,000 feet, their wilderness designated and mapped but vast enough to swallow the details of what happens there. Zion in the southwest, a slot in the earth that 4 million people visit every year and still does not fully yield its secrets. The West Desert spreading toward Nevada, flat and pale and threaded with the ghost roads of the Pony Express Trail, dotted with mine shafts that go down into the dark at intervals across the terrain like punctuation in a language nobody reads anymore. This is the state where 10 people disappeared. Not the same state exactly, not the same corner of it, not the same decade, not the same set of circumstances. Everett Roos walked into the Canyon Country in 1934, and the world was entirely different. The roads that existed then are not the roads that exist now. The reservoir that covers Davis Gulch did not exist. The town of Escalante was a remote desert outpost, reachable only by a long drive on unpaved roads. When Ruiz disappeared, the search party that went looking for him did so on horseback. The aerial survey in May of 1935 was conducted from a small propeller plane at 12,000 feet. The searchers looking down through the windows at a landscape that was, from that altitude, effectively featureless. They had nothing to work with but eyes and time, and the knowledge that a young man with 2 donkeys had walked into that canyon and had not come out. 90 years later, the tools are different. Satellite imagery, DNA analysis, digital forensics, national missing persons databases, Freedom of Information Act requests and investigative journalists and podcast investigations that can obtain documents through legal channels that would have been inaccessible to searchers in 1935. And yet the fundamental problem has not changed. The landscape is still vast. The evidence is still sparse. The people who know things are still, sometimes, unwilling to share them. And the cases that close are often closed not because the truth was found, but because the resources ran out, or the leads dried up, or the man responsible killed himself and took the answer to his grave. Think about what each of these 10 cases left behind and what each of them withheld. Everett Roos left behind 2 donkeys in a corral, a campsite with remnants of supplies, and 4 letters carved into sandstone. Nemo, 1934. He withheld his body, his diary, his final hours, and 90 years of silence that no search has been able to break. The inscription surfaces from beneath Lake Powell when the drought drops the water level low enough, and then the water rises again and covers it, and the cycle repeats without producing an answer. Nancy Wilcox left behind a police report with the wrong date, a cold case database entry with fabricated details, and a mother who held a memorial service 16 years after her daughter walked out the door. She withheld everything else, her location, her remains, the precise truth of what Bundy told investigators in those final taped sessions. The orchard is gone. The ground has been replaced. Whatever physical evidence might have existed in that neighborhood in October of 1974 is under a parking lot now, or scattered by 50 years of weather, or simply gone. Susan Powell left behind a handwritten letter, a secret video, a set of life insurance policies, a blood stain on a tile floor, 2 sons who said their mother was in the trunk, and a husband who chose fire and a hatchet over a custody evaluation. She withheld her location, her remains, and the precise truth of what happened in that house. On the night of December 6th, 2009, the West Desert is still out there. The mine shafts are still uncatalogued. The Diesel brothers excavated one of them in 2022 and found animal bones and no answer. Elizabeth Salgado left behind a pair of shoes at the door of her apartment, a coin with unknown DNA at the site where her remains were found, and a family in Chiapas who counted on a daily phone call and have been waiting 10 years for something to call justice. She withheld the identity of whoever took her from those 18 blocks of daytime Provo sidewalk, the vehicle that carried her to Hobble Creek Canyon, and the name of the person whose DNA is on that coin. Holly Courtier left behind a $60,000 search bill, a set of Freedom of Information Act documents that are almost entirely blacked out, and a Washington County investigation that was opened and has never been publicly resolved. She withheld the contents of the recorded interview, the name of the person who tipped off the Park Service to her location, and a clear account of where she was and how she survived 12 days in a canyon that 4 million people visit every year. Brian Robinson left behind 77 photographs documenting the route he took into the high Wintas, a body at the base of a cliff, and a rope hanging from the rock face above him that authorities chose not to mention publicly for years. He withheld the reason he left the marked trail and attempted to cross an unnamed saddle, and whatever understanding of that saddle he might have gained before the ground gave way. Verlaine Briggs left behind her school books, found beside her body in Lambs Canyon, and a homicide case that has been open for 48 years without a single public suspect. She withheld the face of the person who drove her from a college campus into a canyon 20 minutes from the city, and the circumstances of what happened in those 2 days between her disappearance and the discovery of her body. Bobby Campbell left behind a child at home, a set of witness accounts describing a carpet and a river, and a Jordan River that has been dived and searched without producing confirmation of what those witnesses say they know. She withheld her location, her remains, and the verified truth of an account that has been circulating for 30 years without producing a charge or an arrest. Rosie Tapia left behind an open file, an active cold case listing, and 30 years of anniversaries that have come and gone without a public answer. She was 6 years old. She withheld nothing. She was a child, and whatever happened to her was done entirely without her consent or her agency. The withholding belongs entirely to the person who took her, and that person has never been named. Deborah Kent left behind her keys on the asphalt of a high school parking lot, a kneecap key in a field that proved everything except where she was, a bone fragment that suggested a location without confirming it, and a confession from the man who took her that gestured at the answer without giving it. She withheld nothing either. The withholding belongs to Ted Bundy, who understood exactly what he was doing when he kept the precise location of his victim's remains as the last piece of leverage available to a man sitting on death row. He used it until the morning of January 24th, 1989. And then the state of Florida executed him, and he took it with him. Here is what the 10 cases, taken together, produce in aggregate. Not a theory about Utah specifically, not a claim that this state is uniquely dangerous or uniquely negligent, but an observation about the particular conditions that allow disappearances to become permanent. Proximity to inaccessible terrain, institutional failures that let trails go cold in the critical early days, evidence that is mishandled, withheld, or simply lost, witnesses who see things and say nothing, or say something years later when the information can no longer be acted on effectively. Documents that are created and then redacted into silence. Cases that are classified and closed before the full picture is assembled. And a landscape that is, in the most literal sense, too large to search comprehensively. Too many canyons, too many mine shafts, too many pull-offs on too many canyon roads, too many unnamed saddles above 11,000 feet. The map of Utah looks different once you know these 10 cases. The canyon country south of Escalante is not just beautiful desert terrain. It is the place where Everett Ruiz carved Nemo into the stone and walked away. The suburban streets of Holiday are not just quiet residential blocks. They are the streets where Ted Bundy was already watching before anyone in Utah knew his name. The West Desert along the Pony Express Trail is not just empty high desert. It is where Josh Powell claimed to have gone camping in a blizzard with 2 toddlers, and where Susan Powell has likely been for 15 years. The streets between a language school and an apartment complex in Provo are not just 18 ordinary city blocks. They are the last 18 blocks Elizabeth Salgado ever walked. The grotto at Zion is not just a trailhead. It is where Holly courtiers stepped off a shuttle and began 12 days that have never been fully explained. The high Uintas are not just a wilderness. They are where a rope hung from a cliff, and authorities said nothing. Lamb's Canyon is not just a canyon. It is where Valaine Briggs's school books were found beside her body, with no one ever held responsible. The Jordan River is not just a river. It is where witnesses say Bobby Campbell was thrown, wrapped in a carpet, 30 years ago. A Salt Lake City apartment complex is not just a residential building. It is the last place anyone confirmed seeing Rosie Tapia in August of 1995, 30 years ago, with the file still open. And the parking lot outside Viewmont High School in Bountiful is not just a school parking lot. It is the place where Deborah Kent's keys were on the ground and Ted Bundy was already gone. The Nemo inscription at Davis Gulch surfaces and submerges with the level of Lake Powell. When the drought is bad enough and the water drops low enough, it comes back. 4 letters and a year. Carved by a 20-year-old artist who walked into the desert and decided, in the last piece of writing he ever left behind, to sign his name as nobody. When the water rises again, it goes back under. It has been doing this for 60 years. It is still there. He is not. And some version of that sentence, still there, not there, applies to every name on this list. 10 people, 10 corners of Utah. And somewhere, in the canyon, the desert, the parking lot, the river, some of them are still there. Some of them are